Welcome back to the most accurate podcast here at 4for4 Football. As always, I'm your host, John Daigle, for the Monday waiver wire preview. Two doubleheader Monday nights for the next 2 weeks. So an early start, including for week 4, Monday night, 6 p.m. Eastern. As always, we are here to discuss what is available to you live on 4for4.com. And that is the week 3 waiver wire column with all of your pickups, the drop list, and contingency top 10, not to mention positional rankings that have all been sifted through and continue to be edited through Thursday, especially with 2 Monday night games. And if you go to 4for4.com, you will see that Josh Reynolds is the cover boy and the number 1 pickup of the week, because you may have drafted an unbalanced lineup. And that's okay, since our job is to continue grinding weekly and finding the best plays in a week-to-week game. And what we've seen so far for Josh Reynolds on the Lions is that he's earned a 21.8% and 17.6% target share, averaging 17.8 PPR points per game for this Detroit offense. Not only that, but we think he has a higher floor and potentially higher ceiling moving on, because Amon-Ra St. Brown suffered a toe injury in the third quarter. And from that time on, after he suffered his injury, Amon-Ra only had 1 catch for 5 yards. So not only is Josh Reynolds an immediate plug-and-play option if you're dealing with so many injuries, and we'll get to a lot of those injuries as we move along in the show, but also we think he has a higher ceiling and could just be the better play over Jameson Williams whenever that sophomore is ready to return in week 7. So we are getting ahead of Amon-Ra's injury and Jameson Williams' suspension, and we're now starting and flexing Josh Reynolds in every league where you need those options and need available starters moving forward. Another player that I think is flex-worthy is Tutu Atwell. And it's a double-edged sword what's happening here, because we've seen now that 8 of Tutu's 17 targets have come in motion. Pro Football Focus. He's being concerted, purposely schemed targets for a 19.4% target share through two games, which of course is second on the team behind Puka Nakua's ungodly 39.4% target share. Puka, who is inexplicably only rostered in 77% of Yahoo leagues. The rest of you 23%, please get with it immediately. But the point is that not only is Tutu getting these purposeful targets, that's also taking away from Tyler Higbee and making Higbee droppable in all leagues. Remember, Tyler Higbee had a 24.7% target share in his last 7 games for the Rams last year, a team high mark. And that was because no one else earned targets. But now we see Puka's target share that we mentioned, Tutu's target share, and Kylen Williams, who's run a route on 80% of dropbacks through the first 2 games and has 12 targets to date. These 3 players alone are now taking away from Tyler Higbee, who's not getting schemed targets. Thus, we can move on from Higbee for options in the waiver wire column. Another flex option, wide receiver 3 even moving forward, is Tank Dell for the Texans. Because Noah Brown, following week 1, led the team in the season opener in routes run, but was moved to IR with an injury afterwards. And what we saw was Tank Dell finish second on the team this past week in routes run, and Houston's cluster injuries are now forcing CJ Stroud into volume. The Texans have 44 and 47 pass attempts in their first 2 games because of offensive line injuries and defensive injuries. And if we think they're just going to continue hammering the ball through the air, it sets up so well for Nico Collins, who's averaging over 20 PPR points per game right now, and more importantly, Tank Dell. Because this didn't come out of nowhere. Dell has quietly been targeted on 27% of his routes dating back to the preseason, which is 21st among 151 qualifiers with at least 10 targets in that span. Tank Dell earns targets. And if we think the Texans can't play defense and are constantly throwing because they're in negative game script, including week 3, where they're already 9.5-point dogs against the Jaguars, this bodes well for everyone in Texans passing game, Tank Dell included. We've talked about wide receivers now. Let's move on to some running backs, because Zach Moss would obviously be the top running back pickup if you weren't already rostered in over 50% of Yahoo and Sleeper leagues. Zach Moss, of course, handled every single running back touch for the Colts this week after Deion Jackson fumbled twice in their season opener. And I think what that leads us to is Craig Reynolds being one of the sneakier pickups among the Lions offense. Because David Montgomery, after he suffered his quad injury this past week, told reporters it's going to be, quote, a couple of weeks for his injury to heal. And from the time Montgomery left the field for the rest of the game, it was Reynolds and Jahmyr Gibbs who split carries with 3 each. Jahmyr Gibbs is going to continue to take on that role that he was drafted for. 3.6 catches per game last year at Alabama. And then now he's seen 85%, 11 of 13 of Detroit's running back targets through 2 weeks. That's not going away. What we're betting on Reynolds for is that perhaps Gibbs isn't used on early down role. And that early down role is important since Montgomery had averaged 18.5 carries in the first 2 games. If we think Reynolds even gets a piece of that and gets 10 to 12 touches, with all the injuries around the league right now at his position, that certainly makes him serviceable. And I also think Reynolds is the better pickup over any of the Giants' backfield. Saquon Barkley is now expected to miss 2 to 3 weeks with his ankle sprain, including this Thursday short turnaround against the 49ers. And what I think is going to happen in your league is that everyone will perceive Kyren Williams' success this past week as the overall RB2 on 95% of Los Angeles running back touches. That then maybe makes them think the 49ers are susceptible on the ground to running backs. But we know that's not the case. Outside of Williams' performance last week, the 49ers limited 3 separate players in Pittsburgh's backfield to less than 7 PPR points each in week 1. And just 1 year we are removed from the 49ers allowing a league low 11.6 fantasy points per game to opposing running backs. They do not allow success to opposing running backs. Thus, we think that no one for the Giants is actually a plug-and-play option in week 3 on Thursday night. Having said that, if you do want to bid on one long-term in deeper leagues, just in case the Giants organization is perceiving Barkley's injury wrong and wants to slap him on IR to miss the next 4 games, Matt Breida short-term would be my pick. Because all we have is week 18 under this very same coaching staff when they played that meaningless game against the Eagles. And in that game, Breida ran 29 routes to Gary Brightwell's 17. Also earned 8 targets in that game, which is exactly what we want if we're targeting one of these players. But I also don't mind sprinkling on their 5th-round rookie, Eric Gray, in 12, 14-team leagues. Because Gray has been inactive in both games so far this year. But if we're throwing a dart, at least he has somewhat of the profile we want. Not encouraging that he's a 65th percentile athlete, 24-year-old rookie as well, but the 10th most explosive runs of any running back in the FBS last year, and has also dropped just 2 passes on 102 targets across Tennessee and Oklahoma since 2020. For deeper leagues, that's where I want to sprinkle my fab, thinking long-term, just in case Barkley's injury is more serious than we thought. And speaking of deeper leagues, since we are through 2 weeks of football, it's time to bring back deep league notes for everyone. And I want to start as the only podcast that's going to talk about Kylen Granson, because Jelani Woods opened the season for the Colts on injured reserve, and Andrew Ogletree quietly suffered a head injury in week 1. And you wouldn't know from his box scores, but Kylen Granson has now finished as the PPR tight end 14 and tight end 9 with a 14.1% target share through 2 games for Indianapolis. And this offense, remember, under Anthony Richardson, had 13 scrambles from him. But now with Richardson and the concussion protocol, there's a chance those scrambles become dropbacks that are passes. So we may be getting more volume for the Colts through the air since Richardson may miss week 3. And we've seen success for Gardner Minshew under Shane Steichen. In his last 4 starts under Steichen with the Eagles, Minshew finished as the QB9, QB18, QB7, and QB17, and came off the bench this past week and went 19 of 25 for a touchdown. We think the Colts offense can still move through the air, whether Richardson is playing or not. Thus, Kylen Granson is a really sneaky option for tight end premium leagues. Another sneaky option for PPR leagues is Braxton Berrios, because the Dolphins are unsurprisingly averaging the 7th highest pass play rate from neutral great game script through 2 weeks. It's an offense we want to target their pieces through the air. And Jalen Waddle's unfortunate trip to the concussion protocol may leave him out in week 3, and then Braxton Berrios instead playing for him. Braxton Berrios is already proving he can be a commodity for us in fantasy football with a career 22% target per route run rate before signing this offseason in Miami. And in his first 2 games, we believe he's going to step into that Waddle role since he's doubled River Craycraft in routes run for the 3rd most targets on the team. I'm sprinkling on Berrios everywhere as a potential flex option, regardless if I have Waddle rostered or not. Some backup news is that Tank Bigsby, following a roller coaster week 1, where he did have that fumble where he wasn't paying attention on the play that led to a defensive touchdown for the Colts, outsnapped Josh Johnson 13-6 this past week for the Jaguars against the Chiefs. But Josh Johnson actually outtouched Bigsby 2-0. And that's important since we're all trying to figure out which contingency option to roster behind at Travis Etienne. I genuinely think it's enough, especially given the success Giannis had with the Browns in prior years, to think about stashing Giannis in deep 10 bench leagues, wherever I have the room, and I'm just sprinkling on those players just in case an injury happens ahead of them. Another play I want to sprinkle on to be ahead of potential injuries is Jalen Tolbert, because we don't know the extent of Brandon Cooks' knee injury after he missed Dallas's week 2 win against the Jets. But we do know he turns 30 next week and is already missing games for that knee injury in September. That doesn't bode well moving forward. And so it's important to note that Tolbert, not Michael Gallup, finished 2nd in Dallas in routes run on Sunday and saw all 4 of his targets in the first 2 quarters before that game became a blowout. It's admittedly laughable to think that Tolbert is already an option and someone we should maybe be thinking about in these deeper leagues. But remember, he improved leaps and bounds over the offseason and showed up to the preseason, finishing as the 4th highest graded receiver at Pro Football Focus and finished 21st out of 164 qualifiers and yards per route run. So on deeper benches, given that this Dallas offense is operating at the league's fastest pace through 2 games, I don't mind taking a chance on Tolbert, thinking Cooks could be out long term. And finally, before we get out of here, since I know you all care about which defense is the one to play moving forward, all I will say is that sometimes it's as simple as knowing the Chiefs play Justin Fields and Zach Wilson in their next 2 games. Remember, everything that happens Monday night, as well as for injuries the rest of the week, will be updated on the waiver wire column at 4for4.com. And you can still use the promo code YouTube for 25% off your subscription, since there is still a long ways to go to make sure you can win your league. We will be back Thursday for our preview show at 2 p.m. Eastern with myself and John Paulson. But until then, remember, be a little bit kinder than what's required. We'll see you then.